Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this opening co-chairs briefing and press conference from the World Economic Forum on Africa 2017. My name is Adrian Monck from the Managing Board of the World Economic Forum, and I'm delighted to welcome our 5 co-chairs for this meeting. Winnie Byanyima from Oxfam International, Siyabonga Gama from Transnet, Frédéric Lemoine from Wendel, Rich Lesser from Boston Consulting Group, and Ulrich Spiesshofer from ABB. We'll be hearing from each of them about their reflections on what they would like to see this meeting achieve, and also their perspective on the major issues facing both the continent and the economies of Africa. And I'm going to get things started by turning to Winnie, and Winnie, asking you for what you hope to see from this meeting and what you feel are the issues that we need to confront in the next 2 days.
Thank you. I hope this is working. First, I want to thank very much and congratulate LC and the WEF team for bringing us all together. And then to say how much of an honor it is for me to be a co-chair of the World Economic Forum Africa and to be the voice of civil society here in this meeting. Well, we have a responsibility. In these days that we are here, we have that opportunity that WEF gives us to step aside, a bit away from our roles, our big positions, and to listen to each other and the different voices here. We must use that opportunity well. Listening, what do I hear? A few weeks ago, I was in Nigeria, northeast Nigeria, where there is a conflict, and I was also in South Sudan. I saw women who choose between going hungry or stepping out of the camp, the IDP camp, and being raped. What a choice. 20 million people are on the verge of starvation in these 3 countries with famine in Africa, as well as Yemen. In Africa, it is Nigeria, South Sudan, and Somalia. 20 million people on the verge of death. This is something that I very much want this forum to talk about, because famine is failure of leadership. Here in South Africa, there are questions. People are asking questions about their political and economic leaders in a country which is one of the most unequal countries in the world. Our own calculations at Oxfam, we know that South Africa, 1%, the top 1%, own 42% of the total wealth. That's how unequal this country is. And we see the political questions being asked. African youth are asking about the future. Where is their future? 12.6 million African youth come onto the labor market. No jobs for them. ILO has estimated that 70% of the youth who are working are actually still living in poverty. So there's a question about young people and their futures to talk about here. And then, let's be clear, we can't be talking inclusive growth, which is the theme, and be talking about how to make little changes to the economic model. No, we have to be thinking and talking about how to put poverty reduction, tackling inequality at the center of economic planning. No more about just how to achieve more figures of growth. So we need to build economies that work for the majority of our people. More human economies, economies that lift everyone out of poverty. That is what I want to see at this meeting. Thank
Winnie,
you.
thank you very much. Gama, can you help us with some insights into how Transnet can play a role in meeting some of those challenges that Winnie's laid out, and also some of the challenges you see going forward?
Thank you very much, and good morning. I'm also deeply honored to be co-chair of this World Economic Forum Africa in 2017. I think we are living in a very uncertain world at the moment, especially with the stagnating economic growth across the globe. But at the same time, as Winnie indicates, South Africa is one of those societies with a very high Gini coefficient. We are one of the most unequal societies, and therefore our government begins to talk about how to make sure that we redistribute wealth. How do we make sure that we move the majority of the people from the periphery to the center? How do we make sure that everybody is engaged in some kind of economic activity? So as we sit at Transnet, one of the key issues is that we need to assist the country in terms of lifting it out of the quagmire of stagnant economic growth, and we are doing that in terms of the infrastructure investments that we are making. Transnet has put aside 300 billion rand over the next 10 years in terms of catalytic infrastructure investments that will assist us to grow the economy, to strengthen the backbone of the logistics system in the country. We've just been ranked by the World Bank as number 20 in terms of logistics competitiveness, which we are very excited about, but I think we can do more. We also believe that in terms of creating growth, the fundamental and well-known systems around fiscal and monetary policy have not worked. We now need to look at the entire ecosystem to make sure that we include everybody in economic activity, so that we are able to generate wealth, so that we are able to raise the standards of living and make sure that the inequality can be reversed, because we need to bring back also the frontiers of poverty. As Transnet, we're working also on the continent to use our core competencies to make sure that in terms of rail, port and pipeline, as well as our advanced manufacturing, when it comes to wagons, locomotives, we're able to assist other countries so that they can strengthen their logistics backbones, because the continent needs infrastructure in order for it to improve intra-African trade. We need to make sure that the many missing links can actually be pulled back through infrastructure investment, so that a whole lot of the 1 billion people on the continent can actually find themselves in gainful employment and gainful economic activity.
Thank you. Frédéric, your perspective on some of the issues, opportunities, and maybe also some of the barriers facing companies wanting to come and do business.
I'm very honored to be co-chair of this forum. Wendel is a very old company, European one, founded in 1704. For centuries, we've been focused on Europe in the steel industry, and now we have diversified. But 5 years ago, we had made no direct investment in Africa. Some of our companies were there, like Bureau Veritas, for instance, but no direct. Why did we come? Just because we are excited by the long-term trends. There are ups and downs, you're right, and we may be in a sluggish environment right now. However, we see the very powerful long-term trends. We see the need for development. We see the opportunity to help also the continent to take out of poverty a large number of people. So for the future, we think that there are three key drivers that will shape the future for investors like us. First is companies themselves. There are more and more large companies that are really at the same standard as global ones. 400 African companies have more than $1 billion revenue. We see companies that are stable enough to build LBOs on them. We've just made one in South Africa with Sebo, 35,000 employee company with a very high-skilled management that provides services for the middle class and for helping the companies to develop, taking care of their non-core activity. So we believe that companies are key. We also believe that cities are key. urban development, urbanization is obviously the way to invent a new model of development. And we try to invest in services that help the efficiency of cities, insurance, modern retail, mobility services. I think the cities in Africa in 2050 will not look like the cities in America today. They will have incorporated new technologies that we have to help the various entrepreneurs to build. And the third and last factor I would like to mention is government policies. And on that front, I would be a little bit less optimistic or less positive. I think we're very impressed by some of the very consistent and persistent policies that have been developed in some countries. Rwanda or Morocco are examples. I believe, also what they did is not perfect, but we are concerned with large economies. Nigeria and South Africa, of course, have provided example of instability, for instance, in foreign exchange, that is a major threat for for international investors, or political instability. And I think governments should keep in mind that it's difficult to convince boards of directors in Europe or in North America to invest in Africa. Sometimes risk is overestimated. We should not provide some easy arguments to the opponents to refrain from investing in Africa by some brutal or moves, notably in the political area. I think we need stability. If it's done, I think companies, people are extremely promising, and we remain optimistic. We have invested 1.2 billion in equity, and we will invest more.
Thank you. Rich, you talked yesterday about leadership in the continent, but also there is a tension that we heard in Winnie's remarks between the immediate crises that are faced in some parts of Africa, and also the demands of a growing, educated and young population for change that's fast, versus maybe the more long-term perspective of investors and corporations. What's your perspective coming to this meeting?
So, like my colleagues, I feel honored to be able to be a co-chair of this event. I think the opportunities in Africa, not in any way understating the challenges that we observe right now and in a number of places, but the opportunities in Africa remain substantial, and I anticipate that we'll have growth for years ahead, with volatility around that growth, but growth nonetheless. But with that opportunity comes a responsibility for businesses to work with governments, to work with other stakeholders, to recognize what we need to do to make a difference, to make sure that that growth is truly inclusive, that helps bring millions and millions of people out of poverty, that allows people to live better lives and for their children to have more opportunity than they had. And in that regard, all of us in the business community have to figure out how we're going to do our individual part to contribute to that. For BCG, over the last couple years, we viewed that in a couple ways. One is to double our presence in Africa over the last couple years, and to look to do that again over the next 3 or 4 years. So just to be on the ground with more people and resources and across the continent. And then second, to look for key issues where we think the capabilities that we have can, in partnership with others, never alone, make a difference. And in that regard, we've had three very substantial WEF initiatives over the last few years. Earlier on, an effort on improving African infrastructure, which is a key element for development in the continent. More recently and currently working on Internet for All, and how to expand the opportunities for the 4 billion people, many of whom are in Africa, to have access to the digital world in which we live, which opens up both economic and personal opportunity. And with a pilot now set to initiate in Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, and South Sudan as a way to start to bring 25 million people into a digital world, to give them access to mobile communications over the next 3 or 4 years. And in emerging market health systems, where we have pilots, public-private partnership pilots in Kenya and Nigeria, to try to leapfrog the actually failed or really struggling health policies in developed markets, and to really leverage technology, leverage advances to improve health delivery. And then the final thing I note is financial inclusion. If we're going to provide opportunity for the millions of young people coming along, a key element is to help them have access to the formal financial systems. Financial inclusion, it has huge gaps today. It's measured the wrong way. It doesn't include usage and sustainability. And there are huge issues of trust, here in South Africa, but across the continent. And we see one of the next big challenges of how to really take financial inclusion to the next level. So to me, getting groups together, multi-stakeholder communities together in the way the WEF does is a unique way to share learnings, recommit together, and align on an agenda to really make a difference here in the years ahead.
Thank you. Ulrich, ABB, obviously big player in infrastructure, and infrastructure is one of the challenges that comes up again and again when talking about development. What's your perspective on how companies can take a role in helping bring about the sort of transformation that we've been hearing is necessary?
Thank you, Adrian. Yeah, ABB is a partner of the WEF since its foundation, and we are very honored to co-chair the WEF here in Africa. We are in this continent, we are since 110 years a partner. We're celebrating this year 110 years of presence of ABB in this part of the world, and we're very proud that a lot of the infrastructure that is out there has somehow the signature of ABB in it, whether it's in the power grids, whether it's in the rail sector, whether it's in industry and all together. At the moment, there are two revolutions going on in the world. The energy revolution, where renewables are kicking in at mass, and the industrial revolution through digitalization of industry. And both of them have the unique opportunity in Africa to really create a future which is where Africa finds its own pattern to shape Africa for jobs, for employment, and for prosperity. And if you look at three fundamental facts that need to be managed, the one is Africa is an incredibly rich continent, but the exploitation and the value creation coming out of that natural wealth of natural resources is happening too much through export in other places, and the wealth is going outside of Africa. The second piece is we have a significant demand, a very strong demand, which is growing rapidly, but that demand is too much being addressed through imports from outside of Africa. So we have a mismatch there, and Africa is the only emerging market in the world where demand grows faster than manufacturing. So we really have to do something about it. And what is really the opportunity? I think the opportunity is that we re-domicile the value chain and re-domicile and create a bridge between the natural wealth below the earth and the very strong demand by setting up a very strong African value chain that consists out of a couple of building blocks. Number one, we need reliable electrification. And that's not only the standard classic power grid, it's a combination between the classic power grid and new solutions like microgrids, which give access to the 600 million people in Africa that don't have permanent access to electrification. We need to work on infrastructure and make sure the 20 million that are moving every year in cities in Africa get the appropriate infrastructure going, and there's an opportunity to create employment there. Thirdly, Africa should find its own way to drive industrial prosperity. As in the telecom industry, where quantum leap was done ahead of fixed line right into mobile telephony, where we have today in Nigeria and in South Africa together more people on mobile phones than in the United States of the US, we need to think about how can we create a unique digital pattern in industry in Africa to re-domicile and be very competitive. We need force an environment where cross-border trade is becoming easier and cross-border collaboration is becoming easier. Today, in some situations, it's easier to import from China into an Africa country than from the neighboring country around. We need to work on trade, and we need to work on duties. And most important, we need to take the people with us. Africa has an incredibly strong population which is growing fast. In 2035, Africa will have 1.1 billion people in the workforce age. We need to take them with us. We need to create jobs in the 4 areas that I laid out before and create employment, prosperity, and wealth, and also a positive momentum to move away from we cannot do, we have to wait for others, to a spirit where we can do and we can really drive this jointly by the smart adaptation of technology and infrastructure activities. So I'm quite excited about the future of Africa. If we team up in the right way, if we write this future together in a cohesive way where we have in mind a localization of the value chain to create jobs, wealth, and prosperity, there's a tremendous opportunity ahead of us. And I'm very excited on the discussions that will come in the next couple of days about that topic.
So I know we've all our co-chairs have got sessions to go to very shortly. We've got a brief window for some questions. Can I just get a sense in the room if we have questions for co-chairs? There'll be an opportunity to catch up with each of them individually after this press briefing. So perhaps whilst they gather their thoughts, can I just come back and turn to you, Winnie, and just say there is this tension that you outlined between the speed at which people want change and also the need for business to plan long-term and look long-term. How does that balance get struck? Because it seems sometimes that these two things, this demand for radical economic transformation and at the same time this need for stability and some measure of predictability are at odds with one another.
There is urgency. There is urgency to tackle inequality and poverty in Africa. Because like I said, the young people coming on the market, 12.6 million every year, they need jobs. So there is urgency to look at the economic model and start to plan differently. For business, this means that also business models have to change. We have to encourage more business models that share value with more stakeholders, that don't channel profits only to shareholders, but also share their profits with workers, with consumers, with suppliers, giving them a fair price. So business also has to transform. I think that we have a range of businesses here in Africa. We have some businesses that are values-driven and that share their value better, that pay good wages to their workers, that pay fair price to consumers, that do corporate social responsibility. But we also have a whole range of others that really are very much like the businesses that I see, the global companies that I see more often than not. And these are preoccupied primarily with what am I going to make the bottom line, shareholders, what they are going to get, giving them every 3 months a report on the profitability of the company and where their shares are, totally not looking at other stakeholders in the business. So this change in the business model is also urgent and needs to happen soon for African youth to benefit.
And Siya, if I can just bring you in as a representative of South African business. I mean, you know, if I'm trying to build a business here in Africa, but at the same time, I'm playing in a global marketplace where, say, an Asian competitor can come in with a lower cost of capital, outbid me, and maybe even also with some government help, package up a more enticing offer, you know, even undercut me in some respects. How do you, as an African business, deal with that? And what's the solution in a marketplace where you're not just competing nationally and internationally, you're really competing globally against some pretty aggressive players?
Yeah, in fact, it's what we are currently experiencing at the moment, where you might find that we've got products that are quite cheap, that we can bring to market, which assist people in terms of bringing down cost. However, you do have aggressive competitors who will come in and they will have aggressive capital structures and finance blended structures that they bring in. And therefore, part of what we need to do is to become much more innovative in terms of our development funding institutions. How do we bring all of these institutions together so that they can syndicate and assist us in terms of bringing their cost of finance down so that we can be on an even keel, so that we can level the playing fields, because Africa needs to industrialize, but I think Africa also needs to help itself in terms of looking at African solutions to African problems. And therefore, for us, I think it's quite critical that we look at some of those gaps. But also, importantly, we need to raise the level of entrepreneurship. We need to raise, the level of looking at much more creative ways of deepening, the commitment to the infrastructure gaps that we are talking about, raising commitment in terms of making sure that we can bring in more youth into employment, look at manufacturing, look at competitive advantages of different regions within the continent. Instead of competing, try and collaborate and cooperate so that we can begin to show the resilience that comes out of the kind of specialization that is required in order for us to create more economies of scale and take advantage of the huge marketplace that Africa is becoming.
Thank you. Just going to check the room one more time before I have to release our co-chairs into their next sessions. If anyone has anything they want to throw in, please put a hand up. Tell me where you're from. If not, I'm going to thank each of our co-chairs and wish them a very successful meeting. And to all of you too, I hope you get something from the next 2 days. I know it'll be very busy, so please pace yourselves through the forthcoming 48 hours. Thanks to everyone, and see you inside the meeting. Thank you.